So welcome everybody to the online class. I hope this ends up working well. Rather than getting behind, I wanted to cover some of the material. We'll be having our quiz that was scheduled for today on Wednesday at the beginning of class. And that quiz will only cover last week's material, not what we're going over today. One of the things that I want to talk about today is some general things related to the digestive system. And I'm going to share a window on my screen, if I can find it. So at this point, if I've done this correctly, you should be seeing my, my screen where it says the digestive system has its own brain or brains, and they're called Auerbach's plexus and Meissner's plexus. I'm going to unmute folks and see what happens if I do that.
Doesn't sound good.
That wasn't good. Okay, I'm going to leave you all muted. You can still unmute yourselves one at a time if you want to ask a question by audio. You can also use the chat box or raising your hand to get my attention. So when I say the digestive system has its own brain, people think about the brain as being in control of the entire body, but it turns out there are a lot of systems that have a separate nervous system that control just that part. It's not only the digestive tract that has its own brain, the heart also has its own brain, and these can end up taking care of themselves separately from the rest of the body. The brain in the head can still have an impact on what happens in the digestive system, but for the most part, the digestive system does its own work by itself. The word brain isn't usually used to describe it. Instead, we use the word plexus. So plexus really just means a small bundle of neurons, and any bundle of neurons is, by definition of a brain, a lot of animals have nothing but a plexus as their brain. We have plexes in addition to the brain that all kind of interact with each other. So there are actually two different plexes that control the digestive system: Auerbach's plexus and Meissner's plexus. And they separate out the motor from the sensory control. So the Auerbach's plexus is the one, that is responsible for sensory functions. Nope, got that wrong. Excuse me. Auerbach's is motor. Meissner's is sensory. Sorry about that, folks. Trying to get the details of the anatomy and physiology correct and also work on all the computer stuff that's going on is getting me confused. So Meissner's plexus, the sensory one, is responsible for getting information from the sensory receptors within the digestive tract and using that to figure out what's going on. Auerbach's plexus coordinates all of the motor functions, the movements that occur within the digestive system. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in more detail, what those movements are and how that works. The digestive system is able to do everything it has to do, all of the movements, all of the secretions. It can do all of it all by itself with no input from the brain whatsoever. But that doesn't mean that the brain doesn't have some input. The rest of the nervous system can control what happens within the digestive system through the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, as you recall from last semester, has two branches. There's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic branch of the nervous system is the one that usually speeds things up. The parasympathetic is the branch that usually slows things down. But as you should recall from last semester, there are three exceptions to that general rule. And those three exceptions were digestion, sex, and immunity. So since we're talking about the digestive system, this is one of the exceptions. So for the digestive system, sympathetic slows things down. And parasympathetic speeds things up. So the nervous system in the human body doesn't tell your digestive system what to do. It only tells it when to do it and how fast to do it. It figures out on its own what to do. So how is this working so far? Are you able to see what's going on the screen and hear me all right? I'm seeing some heads nodding, so that I guess means we're doing all right. If all goes well, this should also be available to review on a video later. So let's move on and start talking about some of the movements that are controlled by these plexes. And the first one is peristalsis. In the videos in lab, you got to see pictures of peristalsis working, and I hope you remember those, because that will really help to picture in your mind what it's like. I'm going to try to draw some pictures, though, that describe this too. I'm hoping this works well. I haven't tried this before, but let's see. So I'm going to draw a section of esophagus. So we're going to think about what it would be like to swallow something. Now, peristalsis doesn't only occur in the esophagus. It also occurs in the stomach, in the intestines, really anywhere through the digestive tract. But we'll talk about what it's like here. So the red lines here are representing a section of the esophagus. And let's see, I should have us eat something. We're going to eat something. How about yellow? No, yellow's no good. Can't see that very well. Let's eat something green. So what you see here, this is a bolus of food that has just been swallowed. Now, one of the things that you're always going to have in the digestive tract is you're going to have stretch receptors. And those stretch receptors in the wall are going to detect when there's a bolus of food in a particular place. You'll remember what stretch receptors were like from the stretch reflexes that we talked about last semester. I'm going to just draw this so that it looks kind of like a spindle apparatus. So here we have a stretch receptor in the wall. And I'm going to end this with a little axon end bulb. This, of course, would go to the sensory plexus. The sensory plexus, you remember, was the Meissner's plexus. And I'm not sure if this is going to allow me to write that in. I can make an M easily enough. So I'm going to just call this Meissner's plexus. That's going to have to be good enough. Meissner's plexus then will communicate with Arbach's plexus. Arbach's plexus is the motor plexus. So it's the one that's actually going to control a muscle. So I'm going to get in here and try to draw a bit of muscle. The muscle that it's going to control is going to be a circular muscle, and it's going to be one that lies not at the same place as the bolus of food, but right a little bit higher than that bolus of food. So from Arbach's plexus, we've got a motor nerve that's going to then go and tell that muscle to contract. Now, when that muscle contracts, we're going to end up getting a pinched section within the esophagus. So I'm going to try drawing the esophagus next to it here with a place pinched in where that muscle will have contracted. Pinching right at that point is going to cause the bolus of food to move a little bit further down than where it was before. But if it moves a little bit further down, that's going to trigger a stretch receptor a little bit further down, which will then trigger a muscle a little bit further down. So if we had another, oops, wrong color. If we have another frame here, a little bit later we would have it pinched here. And that will move the bolus of food a little bit further down. So what you have in peristalsis is not so much a single contraction or a single reflex. It's really a wave of reflexes that ends up starting at one end and moving to the other end, pushing as it goes. This is the way you would move something if it's if you're trying to move something through a tube. Maybe you've tried to empty the contents of a little ketchup or mayonnaise packet where you tear off one end and then you pinch and then move forward and pinch and then move forward and pinch. That will cause you to move something along from one end to the other. And that's essentially the same way that peristalsis works here. So when peristalsis is occurring, that's done in order to move things from one part of the digestive tract to another part of the digestive tract. It's the way one uses a toothpaste tube, or at least it's the way I used a toothpaste tube and tried to teach my wife to use a toothpaste tube when we first got married. One of my early lessons in marriage that I will impart to you right now is that marriage involves sharing lots of things, but it doesn't necessarily mean having to share everything. And when you learn that there are some things that don't have to be shared, like toothpaste tubes, it can smooth over a lot of difficulties. When I tried to teach Shelley to use a toothpaste tube my way, pinching at one end and then moving forward and pinching, she just got angry with me. I'll use the toothpaste any way I want. When we got separate tubes, though, she did her way where she would just squeeze right in the middle. And that worked at first when there was plenty of toothpaste in the tube. But as soon as she pinched into the middle and no more would come out, she would pinch at the end and it would just squeeze into the middle. And then pinching at the ends would squeeze it, just back and forth and back and forth. What she was doing was actually a different kind of contraction, something that the digestive tract also does, which is called a mixing contraction. So let me go back to my shared screen. And we'll talk about mixing contractions. The way a mixing contraction works suppose I've got a section here, and this time my section of the digestive tract is going to be horizontal instead of vertical. So this could be a section of duodenum, but it could be any other section of the digestive tract too. And I'll add a bolus of food. Now in this case, the stretch is going to occur right here. That was supposed to be an arrow. So if the stretch occurs right here, instead of the contraction occurring above or on one side of the stretch, with mixing contractions, the reflex causes a contraction in exactly the same spot that was stretched. So the bolus being here, causing stretch right here, is going to cause a contraction right at this point. And that is going to end up forcing the bolus to split apart. It's going to push from here out, but also some of it's going to go in this direction. So the actual bolus of food is going to split and look like this. Now that the bolus has split and it's moved into different places, the stretch is in a different place too. Now the stretch is occurring right here and right here. And that causes a response that causes, let me try again, that causes a contraction to go in this spot and this spot. And that's going to end up pushing your bolus back toward the middle. But to some extent, it will also push a little bit out this direction. So the bolus will now look like this. Most of it will be back in this clump, but there'll be a little bit of it out here and a little bit of it out here. So now that we've got the bolus back into the middle, the stretch has moved again, so it's here primarily. And in the next frame, we're going to have a contraction more like this one. So basically what's going to happen is this bolus of food is going to keep getting squished back and forth and back and forth, just like the toothpaste in Shelley's tube when she did it wrong. That may not work for toothpaste, but it's a great way of mixing the enzymes within the digestive tract with the food that you're trying to digest. So in controlling movements of food through the digestive tract, what you do is you go back and forth between peristalsis and mixing contractions. When you swallow, it's peristalsis bringing material down into your stomach. Once it's in the stomach, you do mixing contractions for a while that digests. Then the stomach switches back. Well, apparently I'm running out of time again already. Has it been that long? I guess so. So you go back and forth between the mixing contractions and peristalsis. When the stomach is done, it moves the food into the small intestine by peristalsis, but then it mixes within the small intestine. Then it moves along again. And that keeps going through the rest of the digestive tract. So having talked about the movements in the digestive tract, I want to start by going through the digestive tract one part at a time. The oral cavity is where digestion starts, the mouth. And digestion there is divided into two different parts. There's mechanical digestion and there's chemical digestion. Mechanical digestion is basically chewing. It's using the teeth. But to some extent, it's also the saliva, because saliva can lubricate the food that you're eating to make it easier to slide down. The chewing part is really important because the chewing is what increases the surface to volume ratio of the food, and that makes it easier to digest. But there is also chemical digestion occurring in the mouth. And that is from the saliva. The saliva actually contains amylase. Amylase is an enzyme that can break down starch. So some actual chemical digestion does begin to occur in the mouth. And that breakdown of the starch turns the starch into sugar. If you eat something really starchy and just chew it without swallowing, just keep it in your mouth, it will gradually turn to sugar right in your mouth, and it'll taste sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. When people eat starch, they don't think of it as being sugar, but it really is. Starch and sugar is basically the same thing. You just can't taste it in the form of starch because all of the endpoints are connected to the chain. Once it's broken down, then you can taste it and tell just how much sugar there is. So I've got a question from Sarah asking, are mixing contractions mechanical digestion too? And they are. The mixing contractions are a lot like chewing, but they occur in other parts of the digestive tract. With some other animals that don't have teeth, like most birds will use a gizzard, which is part of the digestive tract, and it ends up doing the mixing contractions with some swallowed stones, and that's what chews things up for them. So I am running out of time for this meeting. I'm down to 5 minutes. I think I should probably just go ahead and stop at this just to make sure everything works. I might do another one at some point if we need to do some catching up, or I may just consider this enough once we get into class. If in the few minutes that we have left, if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, we could do that.
Could you put back up the last thing that you had on there, the mechanical and chemical?
Yes, I can do that.
I'm going to try to screenshot it just so I have it.
Is it there now?
Yes, it is. I screenshotted it.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So earlier you said that, like, because the digestive system has its own brains, essentially, that it doesn't need our brain in order to function?
Yes.
So why does, sounds kind of weird, but why does like damaging the brain kill us if our systems can still run without it?
Well, you know, damaging the brain doesn't necessarily kill us. It depends on what part of the brain is damaged. When the part of the brain that controls the digestive system is damaged, a person might still be alive. They might be called brain dead, but brain dead people, you can put food into their digestive tract, and their digestive tract will take care of it just fine. Also, you can sometimes transplant parts of a person's digestive tract. Liver is frequently transplanted, but a lot of times they'll do a combination stomach and liver and intestine and pancreas. And when you do that, you end up severing all the connections with the digestive system, or excuse me, severing the connections with the nervous system, so that transplanted group of organs will still work because it's got its own brain to function on its own, but it won't speed up and slow down in conjunction with the rest of the body because it doesn't have those sympathetic and parasympathetic connections.
Okay.
Looks like we're about to end. So I'm going to have to end this meeting, and then I will post the video from it as soon as I get it. Thank you all for joining me, and I hope this turned out to be a success. Bye.